if you're listening to this message, your organization most likely received some much needed support from the federal government last year. Now, today, you're likely staring down the barrel of some reporting and compliance requirements, which I'm sure is creating a lot of confusion or concerns for you and your organization. Our goal here today is to bring some much needed clarity to a few burning questions and ultimately provide some solutions to make your job easier. We have some awesome subject matter experts here today that will help guide you through a lot of these topics. And with me is Matt Petroski, Stacie Kowalczyk, Matt Gard, Andrie Meiring, and Allison Jones. And this is a great group of professionals who serve performing arts organizations, and they've helped their clients navigate these uncharted waters of SVOG compliance and reporting. So let's jump right in and let's get started. All right, given that your organizations received federal funds associated with the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, one of the many questions that we've heard is, how do I properly recognize revenue associated with these grants? Matt, can you go ahead and walk us through how nonprofit organizations should recognize SVOG grant revenue? And specifically, can you talk to any barriers that may exist when looking to recognize grant revenues versus potentially defer them over time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the number one question that I've gotten, right? These organizations went through this, arduous process to be able to, application process to get these funds. All of a sudden it shows up in their bank account. Now, how do I recognize it? Do I recognize all the revenue right up front, right when I got it? Does it spread out over time? How does this all work? And really, this is a unique kind of grant, right? Because it allows you to go back and use this grant for expenditures that happened. We're talking about almost 2 years ago now, right? Right when the pandemic kicked off. Or you can use it on a go-forward basis. So it has some unique aspects there. Timing was also unique, right? Most organizations got this last summer, so it may have fell in your fiscal year end. It may have been right after. It may have kind of crossed over. So again, it's how much would be recognized in the fiscal year end, how much is going to go to the future years. And so there's some unique aspects to this grant that are much different than traditional grants that our nonprofit organizations typically get. But I mean, to answer your question, Jeff, ultimately it's accounted for as a conditional contribution. I think many of us have heard of that, conditions like a matching grant or some other performance obligation that has a condition that has to be met. Well, same general idea here. The barriers or the conditions that are in this grant has to be used for the eligible expenses that are listed in the program, right? There's a right to return. If you don't use it properly, you'd have to return those amounts to the SBA. So conditional contribution that as those qualifying expenditures are met, that's when you recognize the revenue and the revenue recognition happens, right? So as those qualifying expenditures are met, you're recognizing revenue. Well, you may not use all that revenue in 1 year. Some of it may follow to the subsequent year. So how do you recognize that? Well, that stays on your balance sheet as a refundable advance type of amount that would get recognized into revenues in future years. And then one last thing on this to consider is, I get the question, is this donor restricted grant? Is it without donor restrictions? Well, it's donor restricted, right? The government put certain restrictions on it. It has to be used for the eligible purposes in the program. Likely, those restrictions are satisfied as soon as those qualifying expenditures are met, not at the same time, basically, but every organization kind of needs to look at the unique facts and circumstances around that. Or if you're an organization that's elected that's simultaneous release option, where if it's released in the same period as received, that it flows through your without donor restrictions column, then you would account for it that way for those organizations.
Thank you, Matt. That was great. It's very informative. So a quick follow-up to that, though. Should an organization's accounting team go ahead and speak with their financial statement auditors now to make sure that everyone's on the same page? Or do you think it'll be best to wait maybe till the end of audit fieldwork to engage in that conversation?
Jeff, you're an auditor just like me, and I think we both know the answer to that question is always, do not wait. Bring this up as soon as you have as soon as you have the questions. Make sure you're discussing the treatment. And really for this one, like I mentioned earlier, it is a unique grant, and there are some strategic ways to be able to recognize the revenue. As I said before, you recognize revenue as qualifying expenditures are met. Well, this program allows you to potentially go backwards and recognize it in the previous period, or to go forward. And so there's some different strategic reasons that you may want to account for it differently, right? Most of these of the organizations that are listening in today got tons of different federal or different relief options, right? And so you have PPP, you have ERTC, you have Shuttered Venues Grant. and making sure that the applying those amounts to the various grants or relief options that were out there, you want to make sure you're maximizing those dollars and applying it accordingly, right? So there may be some strategic reason that maybe we don't want to use the shuttered venues until the future periods because we still have PPP and other funds that are going to be used for prior periods. So that's one, you want to be able to maximize those funds. The second strategic reason is single audit. And I think everyone's heard that word, single audit. What does that mean? How does that apply to us? Most performing arts organizations that got these grants, they may not have had a single audit in the past. They typically weren't getting a lot of federal funds. The Shuttered Venues Operator Grant is a federal funding that would require a single audit if you expend more than $750,000 in a given year. So what does that mean? Well, let's say I got a $2 million Shuttered Venues grant, right? If I apply $1 million in the current period and $1 million in the subsequent period, that means I have 2 single audits. I clip 750 in both years. Or if we look at it strategically and I have 1.5 million in the prior year to apply it for and only 500 in the future fiscal year, I'd only have to go through that single audit process once. So again, given the uniqueness of this grant, it provides a lot of strategic opportunities for determining when those qualifying expenditures under this program are met and when the related revenue is recognized.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Admittedly, that was kind of a self-serving or cheeky follow-up question there. I knew the answer, but I figured I would ask it anyway for our listeners. So thank you, Matt. Well, all right, we're going to be back next time with another quick segment to discuss some of the many strings. You heard Matt kind of allude to the fact that there might be single audit requirements. And so there's some strings that are attached to the receiving some of these SVOG funds. And so we're going to be back here very shortly to talk about some of the some things that your organization may need to do to engage an external auditor to make sure that you're in compliance with some of those grant requirements. So thank you for listening today. We'll be back soon.